Hey everyone, Mr. DVB here. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking all Spider-Man films from worst to best, including No Way Home, which is finally out after months and months of waiting. It was such a great experience getting to sit down and finally watch that movie in a packed theater with tons of Spider-Man fans cheering and clapping. It was just a surreal experience, and I'm so glad that I finally got to watch that movie. I was so excited for it. This ranking is going to include not only the live-action Spider-Man movies, but also Into the Spiderverse and the two Venom films. So there's 11 movies I'll be talking about in this video, so it's going to be a pretty big one. There will be spoilers for No Way Home, but I will be separating the spoiler talk from the non-spoiler talk. So when I do get to that film in my ranking, there will be a pop-up to tell you guys what time you can skip to avoid hearing anything if you haven't seen the film yet. With that being said, let's swing our way into this video. So coming in last place for me is Venom, the first Venom film from 2018. I really don't like this film. It's the only film on this list that I consider genuinely bad. It's even worse than bad for me. I think it's a pretty terrible movie, to be honest. I have never liked it. I've seen it twice when I saw it in theaters, and then I rewatched it before seeing Venom Let There Be Carnage. And it's just a bad movie. I really don't know what to say. I'm surprised that there's as many people out there who like this film as there is. I mean, all the power to you. There's a lot of things in this movie I just can't get past. First of all, the story is just super rushed and poorly told. We're introduced to Eddie Brock as this big-name reporter who's got this girlfriend that he loves and he's planning on proposing to. We're introduced to that, and then 5 minutes later, at the very start of the film, he's lost his job, he's a nobody now, he's broke up with his girlfriend. So right away, that's rushed. His whole arc and everything. He becomes Venom like 40 minutes into the movie, and then there's only like a half an hour or like 40 minutes left before it actually ends. The main villain, Carlton Drake, he becomes Riot like an hour into the film, and there's only like 15 minutes or so until he dies. So it just gets super rushed towards the end, and the movie could have easily been like an extra half an hour longer to really flesh out the characters more. The dynamic between Eddie and Venom is decent, I guess. It's not exactly like the perfect iteration of the character, in my opinion. I would prefer for them to take it a little bit more seriously, but I think Venom looks pretty cool, and he sounds awesome as heck in the movie. So there's certainly some things they get right, but the story and the characters, besides, Venom, kind of suck in my opinion. It's not a good film anyway. It's got pretty mediocre CGI, the action sequences are nothing memorable, and overall, it's just a big mess of a movie that feels like a very Sony product type film. So not a huge fan of Venom at all. Next up on my list is Venom Let There Be Carnage. Now, I actually think this film is quite a big improvement over the first movie. It's still not, technically speaking, a very good movie, but this film definitely delivers on the entertainment factor. I think this is quite a fun film from start to finish. Not a good movie necessarily, but I do enjoy it. I think it's funny. The dynamic between Eddie and Venom in this movie, I know some people say that it's pretty much the exact same jokes reused, but I actually found the film quite a bit funnier than the first one. There was a lot of moments where I was chuckling quite a bit at this movie. I think the action sequences are definitely improved from the first one. Carnage as a villain is better than the villain in the first movie by a lot, and he's still not even that good of a villain, so that tells you how bad the villain in the first movie was. But Carnage here, I think he's decent. I think that Woody Harrelson's pretty good casting. They don't really do much with the character, and the writing still isn't all that great. But, they do give him more to do, I guess, than they did with Riot. The plot of the film is pretty simplistic. It's not like some huge save-the-world type plot like the first movie. So I do like that it kind of grounds itself a bit more, while still giving us, in my opinion, bigger scaled action sequences. So I enjoy the film quite a bit. I think it's entertaining. I think it's funny. And yeah, those are really my thoughts on Venom Let There Be Carnage. There's not really a whole lot for me to really say about it. It's a pretty rushed film. It's only like an hour and a half long, and it goes by really fast. There's never a dull moment, though, and I have fun with it. It's kind of like a guilty pleasure film almost, I guess. Next up in my ranking is The Amazing Spiderman. Now, I used to like this movie a lot when I was younger. When it came out, I mean, as like a 10-year-old Spider-Man fan, I obviously loved the film. But then as the years went on and, Andrew Garfield's films were canceled, and I started to just kind of lose interest in him in general as the character, I started to like this film less and less. And earlier this year when I rewatched it, I did not like it. I thought it was really boring, and it actually caused me to skip TASM 2 in my first rewatch. But when I rewatched this movie a couple days ago, I actually found myself liking it quite a bit more, and I was certainly able to appreciate it more than I did earlier this year. I think Andrew Garfield's actually really good in the role. He plays, a different Spider-Man from Tobey and a different Spider-Man from Tom Holland, and that's one thing that I guess is really good about the character of Spider-Man in film, is that we've had a very different iteration of a character each time. They're all very different from one another. And I like that about it. I think, Andrew really nails the kind of like quippy, sarcastic Spider-Man very well. That transcends into his Peter Parker as well. He definitely plays, I guess, a less geeky version of Peter than Tobey Maguire did. He kind of plays more of like just a punk type kid, and I don't always love the way that they write Peter Parker in this movie, but I still think Andrew's performance is definitely one of the highlights of the movie. Another thing that's great in this film is the relationship between Peter and Gwen. I think Emma Stone is fantastic in the role, and they definitely have great on-screen chemistry. I think they're by far the best relationship out of any of the Spider-Man iterations we've had, especially in, The Amazing Spiderman II. Their relationship is really great in that movie, but I still like them in this film. Where the film's kind of weak for me is just with how they handle the origin story. I think that the Sam Raimi film did it way better back in 2002. It doesn't have the same, emotional impact that the Raimi films did. So when Uncle Ben dies or when, Captain Stacy die, they don't really... It doesn't, hit me in the feels. I don't find their deaths very emotional, so it kind of feels weaker from that standpoint. And I'm not really just a huge fan of the whole, Oscorp central plot that these films have. It's a little bit weird in my opinion. They definitely wanted to build some big conspiracy around Oscorp and make it into, this centerpiece for the franchise, but it doesn't really work in my opinion. And Lizard as a villain is pretty weak. I think it's cool that we did get to see him as a villain in a live-action movie. Even if his effects aren't the best, it's still cool to have him, but his motives and his main plan to turn everybody into lizards at the end of the film, it's pretty lame, and it's really not anything special. So the highlight of the movie is definitely Andrew Garfield in the role, and the relationship he has with Gwen. Otherwise, I think it's a pretty mediocre telling of the origin story, and you have kind of a weak villain at the center of the film, but overall, it's an alright movie. I still get enjoyment out of it, and I think it has some pretty decent action sequences, despite the somewhat lack of them. Next up, and what I'm sure is going to be one of the most controversial picks on my list, is Spider-Man Far From Home. I want to love this movie, I really do, but since the first time seeing it in theaters, I just can't. There's a lot of this movie I really don't like, but there's also a lot that I absolutely love. I think the second half of this movie is excellent, and they certainly deliver on a lot of the elements I would want them to, but the first half is just too rushed for me, and I'm not a fan of the tone that this movie goes for. It tries way too hard to be this teen romance, kind of cute, funny film with some really campy scenes that just don't work for me. A lot of people complain about the bus scene where he accidentally calls the Jonah track on Brad, and I agree, that's a pretty stupid scene, but just Brad as a character in general, and a lot of moments like that just are there completely for comedy, and a lot of the comedy does not land in this movie. As opposed to Homecoming, which I actually think was a pretty funny film, this one, a lot of the humor is just awkward and kind of cringeworthy at times, and they try really hard to make this movie funny, so a lot of the time, there's scenes that just feel kind of pointless here. Where the movie really picks up speed for me is in its second half. I think when, Mysterio and Spider-Man fight Molten Man, and then when Peter gives the glasses over to Mysterio, that's when the movie really works for me. The second half of the film's great, especially when, the Mysterio twist is revealed. It's kind of obvious it's coming, but I do like the way they handled the character. I know some fans complain about the fact that he's an ex-Stark employee. I don't really care. I think it works for the universe, and I think there are some awesome action sequences in the second half. In particular, the illusion hallway scene is one of the most visually stunning sequences in a Spider-Man movie. That's just taking pages straight from the comics. Such an awesome scene. I like the relationship between MJ and Peter here. It works as this kind of cute little high school crush romance. It's not as deep as Peter or Gwen's, but it's still, good for the most part. And overall, the film, it's definitely got its highlights. I just find the first half a bit too, messy and rushed, and just the tone of it doesn't really work for me. Even in the second half, there's still some tone issues. That one scene where he's in the Netherlands feels kind of out of place. And I do wish the movie focused a little bit more on the post-Endgame stuff, how the world reacted to, coming back from the blip and how Peter's dealing with the Tony Stark stuff, because some of those elements feel kind of brushed over in the first few minutes of this movie, and then they're not really brought up that much anymore. Mysterio as a villain I really like. I obviously love the, the way that they end the movie with him revealing Peter's identity, definitely one of the biggest things a Spider-Man villain has done to the character on film. I think the suit for him looks great. I'm glad they went for the comic book accurate outfit. He's definitely an over-the-top character, but I think Jake Gyllenhaal sells it in a way where it works quite well in my opinion. And so overall, I still like Far From Home quite a bit. I don't think it's a bad movie by any means. I just have my issues with the story and the humor in the first half. Next up in my list, and what I'm sure is surprising for many people to be this high, is The Amazing Spider-Man 2. But I can't lie, I actually like this movie quite a bit, and when I rewatched it last night, I found myself really enjoying it. I watched Far From Home, and then I immediately watched this film right after it, so I was kind of comparing different things from them. And to me, this just felt like more of a Spider-Man movie. Even despite the film's issues, which it certainly has, at its core, I still think it nails a lot of things. And the main one is definitely Peter and Gwen. Their relationship in this movie is excellent. Their chemistry is great. I actually think this movie has really good writing and dialogue when it's not focused on the villains, because the villains are so stupid and out of place in this movie. Their dialogue's bad, their motivations are terrible. But the other, scenes in this movie, like the dialogue between Peter and Gwen, or Peter and his aunt when they're talking about his father, it's actually pretty well written, and there's definitely some great scenes to be had in this movie. And like I said, I really like the relationship between Peter and Gwen. And towards the end of the movie, when they decide they do want to be with each other, it's really nice, and then it makes the scene where she dies just all that more impactful, because they really hit it home with that scene. I think that definitely delivered on the emotion that the first TASM film was lacking, and I find her death to be quite sad. Especially, like I said, just after like that scene they had on the bridge where you really feel like they're in love with each other. It's a gut punch, but I'm really happy that they went for that and they gave this film the emotional core that it needed. From a villain standpoint, it's definitely pretty weak. Electro, well, he looks kind of cool at times. His motivations are just terrible. He is angry at Spider-Man because I guess he stole the attention away from him on the TV. I don't know. It's pretty bad. I don't like him as a character. He's way too goofy. And then there's Harry Osborn, who's just terrible in this film. I do not like Dane DeHaan in the role. He looks way too emo. I'm not a fan of the look of him. And his motivations are even worse than Electro's, in my opinion. He's angry because, he obviously has this disease that's going to kill him. He thinks that Spider-Man's blood can cure it. So Peter, as Spider-Man, tells him, I'm not going to do this. I don't want to give you my blood because it could make you into something worse, which is exactly what happens. Harry gets, a hold of the spider venom, he puts it in himself, and it makes him something worse, and he's angry at Peter for some reason. It makes no sense. His motivations are terrible, and his design is god-awful. He looks like Beavis, but, like, on crack or something. I don't know what they were thinking when they designed Green Goblin in this movie. He also, like, overacts the role like crazy with his laugh and his voice. It's so stupid. But, yeah, whatever. I do think this movie has awesome action. I think the final fight with Electro and the Power Grid in particular is phenomenal. The colors there, the visuals are amazing. This movie has by far the best web-slinging scenes in any Spider-Man movie. There's just so many awesome moments in this film. From a visual standpoint and from like a web-swinging standpoint, I love the POV shots and like the parkour and stuff that he does in his swinging scenes. And I still like the story that they give for Peter here. Him kind of trying to figure out the truth about his father and what happened there, how they were protecting him from Oscorp and all these other things. The idea that Spider-Man's or Peter's the only person who could realistically get bitten by the spider is pretty goofy in my opinion, but whatever. I still think that story is somewhat interesting. I just think the villains, they don't really fit with the main narrative, because the main narrative is Peter and Gwen and his father's past and stuff. So the villains don't really fit into the story, but overall I actually still like the movie, I can't lie. In what I'm sure is going to be another shocking part of this ranking video, I have Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse as the next movie up in my list. I really like this film, I do. I think it's excellent. I just don't love it like everybody else does. I think part of it was that I was not looking forward to this film whatsoever. I didn't even plan on seeing it in theaters initially, and then all of a sudden the reviews came out, and it was just getting marvelous, reactions from people. People were saying it was a masterpiece, one of the best comic book movies ever made. My friend said it was his favorite animated movie he'd ever seen, so I was like, I guess I gotta see this film. And I saw it, and I definitely liked it, but it didn't quite live up to all those, reviews and thoughts I had heard from people. I did rewatch it recently, and I certainly enjoyed it more on rewatch, and I got more out of it. I think it tells a really good story. I love the interactions between the characters, especially Miles and the Peter from the other universe. Where the film really wins me over, though, is with its animation. I think the movie is super unique from an animation standpoint. The way that they include comic effects, when there's, like, sound effects and you see, like, comic pop-ups saying, like, boom and splash and things like that, it's really cool and unique. The frame rate, I think, is a really cool idea, having the movie, I think it's, like, 18 frames per second. Gives it that kind of, like, choppy look, but it's pretty cool in my opinion. I just really like the movie overall. It's got great music as well. The soundtrack's fantastic. And that's really all I can say about the film. I just don't love it like a lot of people do. I think it's really good. I just, I wasn't blown away by it, I guess. And, I mean, to be completely honest, like, No Way Home kind of beats this movie, in my opinion, as far as just, like, multiverse type stuff. But it's still a really cool film that I enjoy. I'm looking forward to Across the Spiderverse for sure now, just with how much more I enjoyed this movie on rewatch. And yeah, those are my thoughts on Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Next up in my ranking is Spider-Man Homecoming, the first MCU Spider-Man film. Now, this movie I had kind of a rocky relationship with, because when it came out, I loved it, I thought it was fantastic, and then as time went on, I started to like it less and less. My biggest issue started to become that the movie focused too much on Peter Parker's high school life and not enough on him as Spider-Man, and so because of that, there weren't really that many memorable Spider-Man scenes. There were pretty forgettable action sequences, none of them really stood out to me. And that became my main issue for a while, and I eventually found the film kind of boring. But as time has gone on, as I've rewatched this movie more and more, I'm back to honestly loving it. I think this is a really good movie. I think it tells quite a good grounded story. This is definitely the most, like, neighborhood-like that Spider-Man has felt, because this isn't some save-the-world plot. He's just trying to stop a guy who's trying to steal some technology and sell it. It's nice to have a small-scale Spider-Man movie like that, and it definitely, like, nails the... I was going to say motivation. So it definitely nails, like, the character of Peter, in my opinion, and, like, what he stands for, in my opinion. So, really like that stuff. I still have, some issues with the movie. I think Vulture's a great villain, and I really like Michael Keaton in the film, but the action is very forgettable here. There's, like, the ferry scene, which I think is decent. The plane scene at the end of the movie is alright. And that's really all. I mean, like, I guess the truck chase is kind of cool, but that's about it. There's not really anything special here from an action standpoint, which... I know I talk about, like, the action with each movie, but it's a superhero movie. They should have good action sequences, and this movie, unfortunately, doesn't really have that, in my opinion. But I still like the story for the characters. I like, I like Tom Holland a lot as Spider-Man in this film. I do think, they do over-rely on, like, the Stark technology way too much in these first films, but, I still think that, like, the character himself and the portrayal is really good. And, yeah, so overall, Spider-Man Homecoming, good movie, really, really like it. Nostalgia-wise, I do like Spider-Man 3 more, but as a film, I've grown to appreciate this more over the years, and I do think it's really good overall. Next up in my list is a pretty divisive movie, and that is Spider-Man 3. While this film is obviously controversial, I do think over the past few years I've seen more and more appreciation for this movie. It's kind of like the same situation as the prequels, in particular Revenge of the Sith. I think people are starting to come around to this movie because it's honestly quite a good film in my opinion. It definitely has issues, and if I'm being, like, realistic, it's not as good of a movie as Into the Spider-Verse, but I just get, more out of this movie. I have more love for it, more nostalgia, and I'll just be honest with you guys, nostalgia is 100% a factor in this video. I gotta be honest, like, I can't, rank these films and not take into account just, how I felt growing up with them and whatnot. And I certainly did grow up with Spider-Man 3. To me, while this movie has its issues with its story, it completely delivers all of the heart and emotion that it needed to, and it lives up to the first two Spider-Man films, in my opinion, in that sense. But it still has its story issues. Not only are there, like, too many villains, there's just too many storylines in general, because you have Peter Parker and MJ's relationship, which is pretty rocky in this movie. They're having problems. You have Peter with the black suit and how that's affecting him. You have Gwen Stacy and kind of a romance with her and Peter. You have Eddie Brock and him at the Daily Bugle, and then you have him becoming Venom. You have, Sandman. It turns out that he was actually responsible for the death of Uncle Ben, and he also has his own issues because he's trying to get money for his daughter. And then there's, Harry, who is trying to go after Peter for killing his father, allegedly, and then he also gets his memory erased. So there's just way too many storylines going on in this movie, and it can get messy because of that. I still don't think the movie's, like, a mess in my opinion, because I still think It's got a cohesive story. I just think that there is too much going on for it to really flow very well. The weak spot of this movie that I think could have easily been removed is Venom. As much as I love the black suit and how awesome it looks, I do think that storyline could have been removed in favor of Sandman's storyline and Harry as New Goblin, because that's definitely the part of the movie that I think was set up the most, was him and Peter's, relationship after the events of Spider-Man 2, where Harry found out that Peter is Spider-Man. I think that definitely needed to be the main focus of the movie. And then you could also have Sandman in there because he definitely fits into the theme of forgiveness. But fortunately, there was just too many eggs in one basket, and the movie kind of suffered because of that. That being said, like I said, it still delivers on all the emotional beats for me. Harry's death, them teaming up in the final act to take on Venom and Sandman works really well in my opinion. And say what you will about the villains, they all at least have realistic motivations, right? Like, as much as Venom isn't a good villain, I understand why he hates Peter, right? He took away his job, he took away his girlfriend. Nobody's gonna hire him anymore now that they know that he faked those photos and whatnot. So it's realistic that he is pissed at Spider-Man. It's not because Spider-Man didn't want to be his friend or forgot his name, right? Like, he has an actual reason. Harry most definitely has a reason, and then there's Sandman. Spider-Man's getting in the way of Sandman trying to get money for his daughter, and that's actually quite an emotional storyline that could have really, really worked, but it just unfortunately doesn't because it doesn't get much development. There's this one deleted scene where Sandman turns into a sandcastle for his daughter, and it's a really awesome part of the film that was unfortunately cut out. It is included in the editor's cut, but you don't get to see it in the main movie, unfortunately. It definitely should have been there. So overall, I still love the movie. I think the black suit looks fantastic. I still love Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man in this movie. I think his character is a bit too naive and stupid at times, especially just with how he treats his relationship with MJ. He's very arrogant, and he's not thinking about how she feels with her job and whatnot, and so some scenes with him can get kind of annoying, and I honestly think that him and MJ shouldn't have had that many relationship issues in this movie, because they weren't together in the first film, they weren't together in the second film. Just let them be together in the third one, and save the black suit and the argument stuff for the fourth movie, which obviously didn't happen, but still. So yeah, overall, Spider-Man 3, I definitely have issues with it, but I think it's still great. I still think it's emotional and whatnot, and it's got a great third act, seeing those guys come together, and it also has by far the best score out of any Spider-Man movie, which is funny because it's not even done by Danny Elfman, but the black suit theme and the Sandman theme, magnificent stuff. Finally, heading into the final three, this got pretty tough for me choosing between these next few ones. In third place, I have Spider-Man from 2002. Now, this could easily change in the future because I have so much nostalgia for this movie, so it's really hard to place this here, but just, how I'm feeling right now, I feel like this is where I'm going to put it. Like I said, it could easily change. I could wake up tomorrow and say, yeah, I don't agree with that decision anymore, but as it stands, I love this movie. I think it's great. I think it's the quintessential origin comic book movie in my opinion. I just love virtually everything about this film. It's aged a lot, undeniably so. It's got terrible transitions and some pretty bad visual effects, but they also kind of add to the charm of the movie in my opinion. And this is just such a memeable film. This and Revenge of the Sith I think are the two most meme-worthy movies of all time. Willem Dafoe in general is just so great in this movie. He has so many hilarious lines and sequences that I'll just always remember. And then, like I said, despite the memes and all that stuff, I love this movie. I think that Tobey Maguire is fantastic as Peter Parker / Spider-Man. He will always be my favorite actor to take on the role. And they just nail the origin story here, and it has all of the emotional beats that you need. I feel when Uncle Ben dies, it's sad. There's just something about him, they nail that aspect of the character. They nail the great power with great power comes great responsibility line. When he dies, it's really sad. I love Aunt May in this film. What I think the Raimi films do better than the other films is that they definitely give all of the supporting characters arcs and stories that are meaningful as well. With the MCU, for example, as much as I enjoy the MCU Spider-Man films, Ned and Aunt May, they're just there for comedic relief for the most part. Aunt May is basically just there to be haha, she's supposed to be attractive, haha, her and Happy like each other. Aunt May here, she deals with her own personal issues with these movies, and that affects Peter as a character, and it just all those elements just intertwine with each other, and it makes for some really great moments in my opinion. So that's what I love about the Raimi trilogy. That's what I think it does best. Peter's personal issues and just the supporting characters, his friendship with Harry, his romance with MJ, all just really well handled stuff. And the score by Danny Elfman, it's great. Willem Dafoe plays just a phenomenal villain, one of my favorite comic book villains of all time. Probably my second favorite, honestly, like right behind Heath Ledger's Joker, I think would probably be Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin. He's just so likable in this movie. And it's just such a fun film. Like, as I'm talking about it, I am, like, starting to, like, debate if it's my third place or not. That's what I mean. It's just very hard to rank these next couple movies. But yeah, love Spider-Man. I think it's awesome. In second place is the newest entry in the franchise, Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie, guys, I mean, I can't believe this film is something that actually exists. I'm going to get the non-spoiler stuff out of the way very quickly because I can't really discuss this movie without going into spoilers. So, yeah, I mean, this is definitely the best, MCU Spider-Man film without a doubt, in my opinion. They nail the character here. Obviously, the multiverse stuff is great, getting all the villains back and whatnot, but just as far as, like, Peter Parker himself goes, this is the best that Tom Holland has been in the role. When I saw him in this movie, I saw Peter Parker Spider-Man. He just nails it here. He gets the widest range of emotions that he has to portray in this film, and I think he nails all those scenes very, very well. I love where his character ends up at the end of the movie. Really love the way they chose to write him. The supporting characters are better than they were in the previous films, in my opinion. The action sequences were phenomenal. Yada, yada, yada. You get it. I love the movie. You can now skip to this part if you don't want to hear spoilers. So, yeah, this movie just delivered on, like, everything I wanted. The first half of the movie was great. It had some weird moments, in my opinion. There was just some times where it felt kind of weird and just, like, awkward seeing these villains on screen, and it definitely felt like it was, like, nostalgia bait, which it is. I mean, this movie is 100%, like, fan service, but there was something that felt off about it. It wasn't that it was being poorly handled or anything. It just felt weird, and I can't pinpoint it. Like, I guess it was, like, one scene where Sandman was talking, and there was one scene where Lizard was talking, and I was like, this just feels off. But that second half is where this movie truly shines. I mean, they just do such a great job with this movie. Having Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield back in their roles, it means so much to me. I mean, I just loved the second half of this movie so much, and I'm so glad that they treated the villains with respect as well. I was really worried that they were just going to be here as the villains and not as the characters that we saw in their respective movies, because Doc Ock, he had a redemption arc at the end of his story. So I was worried they were just going to bring him in and have him be bad guy with mechanical arms and that's it. But it's the same character we saw in Spider-Man II. So they still treat these characters with respect, and I love that about it. It was great having them back in their role, and I definitely got emotional at sometimes. I mean, the scene where Toby and Doc Ock talk to each other for like 10 seconds, that's my favorite part of the entire movie. It's a small moment, but you hear the Raimi theme, you see those two characters together on screen, and it just got me. I was like, this is something else. I mean, it was awesome. It was so great seeing those guys together, and just sharing that little bit of dialogue. And then, Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, he just nails it in this movie. He was so excellent here. The fight sequences were fantastic. The final one with Tom Holland taking on Green Goblin was brutal. I loved it so much. I mean, they just did such a good job with the final act of this movie. It meant so much to me. Seeing all three of those Spider-Men on screen together, seeing the Raimi suit back on the screen and hearing that theme again, like, it's surreal. I don't even know how to explain how it feels to me, just getting all of that in one movie. It's so incredible. And Andrew, I mean, he saves MJ. He's crying because he couldn't do that for Gwen, but he's finally saving someone like that. They really send these characters off in such a fantastic way. And while I highly, highly doubt it's going to happen, I mean, if we got like a Spider-Man 4 and like an Amazing Spiderman 3, guys, that would be amazing. It's probably not going to happen, but I mean, I'm holding on to hope that they'll be something they decide to do in the future. Probably not, but man, that would be great. So yeah, I mean, all in all, like, it was such an awesome experience. The theater was so lively. I mean, definitely the best theater experience I've ever had in my entire life. Everybody was just cheering and clapping when Toby came on screen. It was just such a phenomenal moment that I'll like never forget. I actually managed to catch it on my phone because I was like, I'm gonna have to record this for later. And yeah, I mean, so great. I loved it so much. And yeah, I mean, the way they end the story as well, I love that Peter decides to, like, he goes through with it. He tells Doctor Strange, you have to wipe everybody's memory of me, including, MJ and my friends. It was emotional, but it just works so well because he, in my opinion, at the end of this, he becomes Spider-Man. Like, he was, like, up until this point, he was, like, Spider-Teen, but, like, he becomes Spider-Man at the end of this movie. That scene where he says goodbye to MJ was, like, so well handled. Him seeing her after she's forgotten who he is at the like at that little coffee shop she works at, and then now she has like a thing going on with Ned. Peter wants to tell her the truth, but he decides to like put the note in his pocket and he leaves. That was so great. And then the ending of the movie where he goes into the apartment, like he's living in this apartment now. He's got his boxes of stuff. He has the phone, the police scanner on his phone, and then he puts on his new suit, which I wish we got a better look at, but he puts on the new suit, which looks great, and he swings. It's nighttime, and it's like snowing. It's like, that is Spider-Man. Like, those last 10 minutes are quintessential Spider-Man. Him seeing Happy at May's grave, like, so great. And like Aunt May's death also, really liked that, because I've not been the biggest fan of her character in the MCU. She's just there for mostly comedic relief, but here they actually gave her a purpose, towards the end of her role when she dies. It was kind of weird having the great responsibility line come from her, but having like Toby reference it later I thought was great, and her death definitely stood for something. So yeah, I could go on this movie, on and on about this movie forever, but it was excellent. It also looked great. By far the nicest looking Spider-Man movie in the MCU. They did a really good job with the visuals here, and just with like the colors and the cinematography. Really great. So yeah, those were my thoughts on the movie. I thought it was excellent, and yeah. And finally, coming in first place is Spider-Man II. This movie is just so damn good. I mean, I love this film to death. It's such an excellent, film from a story standpoint. Spider-Man 1 is a great origin comic book movie. This is just a great sequel that does exactly what a sequel should do. It improves on like every aspect of the first movie, and it really doubles down on developing the characters, because Peter Parker gets so much story here. Him trying to balance his life as Peter Parker and as Spider-Man, him making certain choices, that one sequence where he, decides he no longer wants to be Spider-Man. It's all so excellent. It's so beautifully handled, very, very well written. And then you have like a great villain, you have better action sequences. The train fight in particular is phenomenal. So there's just all these elements they just do such a damn good job with. All while still giving us a great Spider-Man movie. I mean, it's just such a well-made movie from start to finish. I think Spider-Man 2 will always be, like, just one of the best comic book movies ever made, in my opinion. And, yeah, it's just such a good film. It's funny, because it's like, I always have this in my rankings where it's like the new movie I talk so long about, so that when I get to the final film on my list, it's like, even though it's my favorite, I don't talk about it as much. But yeah, I mean, this movie it continues the story in such a good way, and it develops the characters in such an excellent way. Aunt May, her issues in life where she's dealing with money problems and whatnot, and like losing her house, how that affects Peter. That's what I mean when I say like the characters in these films, they get so much depth, and like they get their own really big arcs that just aren't present for a lot of the characters in the newer movies. And that's what I really love about this film. It's not just a Spider-Man movie. It's a movie about all these characters, and it's really great. And then, the final act with Doc Ock redeeming himself, it's just so excellent. Danny Elfman's score, I love Spider-Man. It's a good time to be a Spider-Man fan. I guess that's all I'll say. So that is my ranking of all of these Spider-Man movies, folks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what your ranking is down below. I know I have a very weird one, having Far From Home so low on my list, and having, Spider-Verse kind of like in the middle, but that's how I feel about these movies. So, yeah, there you go. Those are my thoughts, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.